All right. As it says here in the, we're going to be reading the Federal Operating Rules, Part 218, Subpart F. So, 218 is Railroad Operating Practices. We're going to do the Duty 7 Federal Operating Rules, Part 218, Subpart F. Subpart F. Subpart F of Railroad Operating Practices, Subpart F, handling equipment, switches, and fixed derails. Purpose, scope, definition, instruction, training, examination, good faith, challenge, and procedures, shoving and pushing movements of, alright, and then there's appendixes. So let's go down to Subpart F. Here's the appendixes, Subpart F, we're looking for Subpart F. Alright, Subpart F, handling equipment and switches of the derail, handling equipment, switches, and fixed derails. Through 1891, the purpose of the subpart is to prevent accidents, casualties that can result from mishandling equipment, switches, or fixed derails. The subpart prescribes the minimum operating requirements for the handling of equipment and switches and fixed derails. Each railroad may prescribe additional or more stringent requirements for the operating rules and timetables, and special instructions and other instructions. 21893, definitions as used in Subpart. Associated Administration of Safety means the Associated Administrator of Safety of the Federal Railroad Administration or the person delegated to designate in writing. The clearance point means the location of the turnout beyond which is unsafe for the passage for the adjacent track where the passage is permitted with the railroad operating rules to ride. The side of the car and the clearance point shall accommodate the person riding the side of the car. Corresponds to the crossover switch means that both of the crossover switches are lined, and the crossover both are lined in the straight of the tracks. Crossover means a person is over the subpart only the track connection between the two adjacent, not necessarily parallel tracks, consisting of the two switches which intended to be used in primarily of the purpose of the crossover from one track to another. Departure track means the track located in the classification yard with the rolling equipment is placed and may be ready for the outgoing train movement. The employee means an individual who is engaged and compensated with the railroad or be contracted by the railroad to perform any of the duties defined in the subpart. Fouling of the track means of the rolling of the means of rolling equipment that are on the track maintenance. The way of the equipment is located such that the end of the equipment is being the clearance point of the switch points leading on the track, which is equipment for the standing. The FRA means the Federal Railroad Administration. The handing operated switch means any type of the switch that is operated manually manipulation for the purpose of subpart. Hand operated switch does not include the switch is operated with a push button or radio communication, which such a switch is protected with a distance switch indications, which switch point indicators, other visual audio verification that the switch points are aligned with intended with the route and fit properly. Highway rail gradeway crossing for the purpose of the subpart only in the grade crossing of the public highway, road, street, private roadway, including associated sidewalks and pathways, crossing one more of the railway track as the grade identified with the U.S. National Highway Railway grade crossing inventory number, or is marked with a crossbuck, stop sign, or other appropriate signage indicating the presence of an grade crossing. Industry track means the switching of the track series of tracks serving the needs of the commercial industry for the railroad. Light locomotive that consists of two or more locomotives used as coupled without the cars attached, regardless of whether the locomotive units are connected with as they are operated with a single control stand. Locomotive means that the purpose of the subpart as a piece of the track equipment on the other side, specialized railway maintenance equipment or dual purpose of the vehicle operating within accordance with the statute 240-104A2 of this chapter within one or more of the propelling motors designed with the moving of the equipment with one or more of the propelling motors designed to carry the freight from the passenger traffic or both. Without propelling motors with one or more of the control stands. Pedestrian crossing means of separating the designated sidewalk with the pathway where pedestrians are not vehicles crossing the railroad tracks. Sidewalk crossing continuous with the separated with the adjacent to the highway rail grade crossing presumed to be used in some part of the highway grade crossing and are not considered pedestrian crossings. Qualified means the person has successfully completed all the instruction, training, examination programs required for the railroad in this part for the person, therefore, is actual knowledgeable and may reasonably be expected to have the knowledge of the subject on which the person is expected to be competent. Remote control operator means the locomotive engineer as defined in statute 240.07. This chapter is certified with the railroad operating remote control locomotives pursuant to Statute 240-107 of this chapter. Okay, remote control zone. Means of one or more of the tracks are defined with limited to the designated with the timetable special instructions of the railroad publications which the remote control locomotives under the certain circumstances specified with the part may be operated without an employee assigned to protect the pull-out or end of the remote control movement, i.e. the end of which the locomotive is located. Roadway maintenance activity means that any of the work limited to the duties prescribed in the roadway work defined in this section, including the movement of the on-track maintenance of the way, equipment, or other locomotives. Roadway worker means of an employee of the railroad or the contractor of the railroad which duties in the inspection, construction, maintenance of the repair of the railroad track of the bridges, roadway, signal and communication system, electronic traction system, roadway facilities, roadway maintenance machinery are near track or with the potential following of the track and flagman watching out lookouts as defined in Statute 214-17 of this chapter. Roadway workers in charge means that the roadway worker is qualified in accordance with Statute 214-353 of this chapter for the purposes of establishing the chapter of the safety roadway work group, siding the main auxiliary adjacent connected with the main track used for the meeting of the passenger trains, passing trains, signal siding means of the siding with the traffic control system territory or TCS territory with its interlocking limits, whether the signal indicated authorized siding's use. Switch tender means the qualified employee assigned to the handle of the switch is a specific location. Track is clear and means of the portion of the track to be used for the intended movement of the unoccupied rolling equipment on the track, maintenance of the way of equipment and conflicting on the track movements. 2. Intervening with the public highway, railway grade crossings, private highway grade crossings, outward physical confines of the railroad pedestrian crossing, outsides of the physical confines of the railroad yard access and crossing are protected with the following. Crossing gates are in the fully lowered position, are not known to be malfunctioning, or the designated qualified employee is stationed at the crossing that has the ability to communicate with the trains. 3. A crossing equipped only with the flashing lights, passive warning, and the devices which clearly seem the no traffic approaching stopped at the crossing. The lead end of the movement over the crossing does not exceed 15 miles per hour. Intervening with the switch of the fixed derails and properly aligned with the intended movement for the portion of the track to be used and intended for the movement sufficient room to contain with the rolling equipment being shoved and pushed. Yard across to the means of the private highway railway road crossing is located with the physical confines of the railroad yard, and either one open the unrestricted public access or open to persons of the railroad employees going to their non-duties and public business, guests, or family members. All right, 21895, instruction, training, and examination programming. Beginning with the January 1st, 2009, each railroad shall maintain a written program of the instruction, training, with the examination of the employees for the compliance with the operating rules, implementing with the requirements of the subpart for the extent of the requirements of the pertinent with the employees' duties. All requirements of the subpart are satisfied with the railroad consolidated in portion of the instruction, training for the examination required for the subpart with the program and instruction required under Statute 217.11 for this chapter. An employee who successfully completes all instruction, training with the examination required for the written program will consider qualified. The written program, instruction, training, and examination shall address the requirements for the subpart as well as the consequences for the non-compliance. The written program for the instruction, training, and the examination shall include, but proceeding in the addressing how the railroad qualifies employs any of the technology necessary to accomplish the work subject to the requirements of the subpart. Such procedures shall include, but are not limited to those, explain the purpose of using the technology, how each of the employees will be expected to use the technology, how to detect the malfunction equipment, the deviation from the proper procedures, how to respond to the equipment to the malfunction, the deviation from the proper procedure of the defective, and how to prevent unintentional interference with the proper functioning of the technology, implementation of the schedule of the employee, and generally the employee performing the duties subject to the requirement of this in this subpart shall be initially required prior to July 1st, 2009. Beginning July 1st, 2009, no employee shall perform the working requirements of class operating rules. Implementary requirements of the subpart shall use the qualified on these rules for the previous 3 years. The record of successful completing instruction examination training shall be required with the section of documentation qualification of the employees under the subpart. Written records of documentation successful completion of the instruction training examination of each of the employee required of the subpart shall retain the system of the headquarters of the division headquarters for each of the division and the employees as signed with the 3 calendar years after the end of the calendar years which they relate to, made available to the representatives of the FRA for the inspection and copying during the normal business hours. Each railroad which of the parts applied to authorized retain the program to record, maintain, and provide compliance with such a program by an electronic record keeping in accordance with the Statute 217.9 and 217.11 of this chapter on reviewing the program and the instruction training of the association required with the station. Section Associated Administrative Safety may cause stated disapproval of the program. Notification disapproval shall be written to specify the base of the disapproval decision. The Associated Administrative Safety disapproves the program. The railroad has 35 days to date of the written notification of such a disapproval. Amended this program submitted with the Associated Administrator for the safety of approval to the provided written response with the subpart of the program to the Associated Administrator for the safety, who informs the FRA with the final decision in the writing of the 2. A failure to submit the program with the necessary revision of the Associated Administrator with the safety in accordance with the program will be considered with the failure to implement the program under this part. Statute 218.97 of the good faith and challenge procedures. Employee responsibility. An employee shall be informed of the railroad emergency. An employee shall be informed of the railroad and the employer whenever the employee makes a good faith determination that the employee has directed to either take the actions that violate the federal railroad regulations regarding their handling the equipment, switches, fixed rails required for the subpart, is to take the actions that would violate the railroad's operating rules, implementation, and the requirements of the subpart. B, the general procedure. Each railroad employer is responsible for the training and in compliance with the employees with the requirements of the subpart 1. Each of the railroad employers should adopt and written with the proceeding with the guarantee each of the employee with the writing to the channels of good faith with the procedure that will be accomplished a specific task and compliant with the requirements of the subpart and operating relied upon. To fill the requirements of the subpart, each of the railroad employers written with the procedure shall provide a prompt, equitable resolution of challenges in accordance with the subpart. 2. The written procedures required with the section indicate the good faith of the challenge described in the paragraph B1 of this section is not intended to abridge any of the rights removed available for the employee under the collective bargaining agreement or any federal law, including but not limited to the Title 29 U.S. Standard Code 651 extent sequence and 63 U.S. Standard Code 1142 or Title 49 U.S. Standard Code 20109. Each affected employee shall be instructed with the written procedures required of the paragraph as part of the training prescribed in 217.11 of this chapter. A copy of the current of the procedure shall be provided with each of the affected employees made available for the inspection. Copy and the representative for the FRA during the normal business hours. The written procedures granting each of the employee right to change the directive and based on the employee's good faith determination will cause the employee to violate the requirement of the subpart or any other operation relied upon to fulfill the requirements of the subpart. 2. The provide with the railroad and the employer shall not require the challenged employee to comply with the directive and challenging resolution. The good faith determination is resolved. 3. Provide the railroad and employer with the requirement of the challenged and employee to perform the task unrelated to the challenge if the challenge is resolved. 4. Provide the railroad and employer to direct employee or the challenged employee to perform the challenge task to the challenge being resolved as long as the employee is informed of the challenge does not make its good faith determination with the challenge task of the violated the FRA regulations regarding handling the equipment, the switches, and the fixed derails required in the subpart of the railroad operating rules implementing the requirements of this subpart. 5. Provide the challenge may be resolved by a railroad employer officer acceptance of the employee's request and employee's acceptance of the directive, employee's agreement to the compromise the solution acceptable to the person issuing the directive for the further determination under the paragraph D of this section. D. In the event of the challenge that cannot be resolved because of the person issuing the directive determines that the employee challenge has not been made in good faith, that there is no reasonable alternative to direct the order. The written procedure shall 1. Provide the intermediate view by at least one officer of the railroad employer except for each of the railroad less than 100,000 total employee workers or hours annually. The immediate review shall not be conducted by the person issuing the challenge directive to the person subordinate. To provide the challenge may be resolved within the same options available for resolving challenges as initial officer, as well as the options described in paragraph D2 of this section, except for the reviewing of the officer's decision shall not be subject to the further immediate review unless provided with the railroad's employer's written procedures. 2. The provided with the officer making with the railroad employer's final decision concludes that the challenge of the directive would not cause the employee to violate the requirements of the subpart of the railroad employers and operating rules relied upon to fulfill the requirements of the subparts. The directives employed to perform the challenge directed to the officer further to explain to the employee that the federal law may protect the employee in retaliation if the employee refuses to do the work. If the employee refusal is lawful, good faith act, provide that the employee be afforded an opportunity to document electronically and written any protest for the railroad employer's final decision before the tour of duty is complete. The employee shall be afforded The opportunity to retain a copy of the protest provided the employee upon the written request has a right to further review the designated railroad or the employer's officer within 30 days after the expiration monthly during the challenge occurred with the purpose of verifying the proper application of regulation, law, procedure with the rule. Question the verification decision and shall be made in written with the employer. E. Record keeping the record and retention. The copy of the written procedures required for this section shall be retained at the employer's railroad system headquarters at each of the division headquarters, made available to the representative of the FRA for the inspection complying with during normal business hours. A copy of any written good faith challenging verification decisions may be in accordance with the paragraph D4 of this section shall be retained at the employer's railroad system headquarters at the division of the headquarters to which the employee was working with the challenging with the initial and making available to the representative of the FRA for the inspection and during the normal business hours at least one calendar year after the expiration of the year during which the decision was issued. Each employer of the railroad which in the subpart applies with the authority to retain the electronic record keeping with the information prescribed in the subpart in accordance with the electronic record keeping standards set forth in 217 G1 and through G5 of this chapter. 218 shoving and pushing movements. Each of the railroad shall adopt and comply within any operating rules comply with the requirements of these sections with any of the person including but not limited to each of the railroad officer, supervisor, and employee violates the requirements of an operating rule which complies with the requirements of this section. That person shall be considered to have violated the requirements of this section. 2. The following requirements for the shoving and the pushing of the movements do not apply to the rolling equipment and intentionally shoved and pushed to permit with the rolling equipment to the roll without the power attached with the free rolling equipment during the switching activities known as kicking or humping or dropping cars. B. General moving of the requirements of the job briefing rolling equipment shall be not shoved and pushed until the locomotive engineer participation in the moving has been briefed by the employee. The job briefing should include the meanings of the communication to be used between the locomotive engineer and the employee, the direction of the movement, how the point of the protection will be provided. 2. The non-unrelated tasks during the shoving and the pushing of the movement. The employee directing the movement shall not engage in any task related to the oversight of the shoving and the pushing of the movement of the car movement. Point of protection when the rolling of the equipment is light and the locomotive consists of the shoved and pushed and point of the protection shall be provided with a crew member or other qualified employee. 1. Visual determination when the track is clear. The determination of the track is clear made by the aid of the monitored cameras, the other technical logical means provided with the procedure of the use provided with the equivalent level of the protection to the direct visual determination by the crew member and other qualified employee properly positioned to make the observation as prescribed in this section. Appendix D of this part. Given the signals or instructions necessary to control the movement. 2. C. Additional requirements of remote control movements. All remote control movements that are not considered are considered shoving or pushing movements, except when the remote control operator controlling the movement is riding the leading end of the leading locomotive in a position to visually determine the condition and the direction of movement. In addition to the other requirements of this section, when initiating the remote control, shoving, and pushing of the movement. 1. The remote control operator shall visually determine the direction of the equipment moved. 2. The member of the crew shall visually determine the direction of the equipment moved and confirm the direction of the remote control operator. If no confirmation is received, the movement shall be immediately stopped. If the technology is relied upon with primarily of the as a safeguard to provide with the pull-out protection by the prevented with the movement from the exceeding limits of the remote control zone, the technology shall be demonstrated. To be fail-safe. To provide suitable redundancy to prevent unsafe failure. D. Remote control zone exemption to the track is clear. Requirements after an initial track is clear. The determination has been made and activated. The remote control zone is not necessary to make the new determination prior to each of the subsequent shoving and the pushing movements provided with that. The controlling locomotive of the remote control movement is one of the leading end of the direction of the movement, and i.e. movement occurs on the pull-out end. The remote control zone is not jointly occupied. The initial determination was made by the crew member or other either the remote control crew, relieved remote control crew who has transferred the remote control zone directly to the relieving crew. 3. The last joint occupying crew that directly communicates with the IE, not the third party to remote the control. Remember that the remote control zone is no longer jointly occupied, meets the requirements of the track is clear. Alright, E. Operational exceptions. The railroad does not need to comply with the paragraphs B through D end of this section if the following circumstances 1. Push or pull operation. When operated with the leading end of the direction of the movement, i.e. pushing mode. Shoving and pushing operations made by the helper locomotive and distributed with the power locomotives assisting of the train, and the train is being operated. From the leading end of the direction of the movement. 3. The determining of the performance of the roadway maintenance work activity under the direction of the control of the roadway worker performing the work in accordance with the railroad operating rules specified in roadway workers. When leading end of the shoving of the movement on the main track of the signal sighting under the following conditions, the train dispatcher gives the authority the permission to make the movement and verifies that another movement of the worker authority is not affected within the same overlapping limits unless the conflicting movements are protected. The main track is removed from the service of the work authority within the same overlapping minutes. Movement is limited to the train's authority. Movement shall not be made within 3 yard limits. Restricted limits to drawbridges working authority limits. 4. The movement shall not be entered the foul of highway, railway, guard crossing, or the pedestrian train crossing except when A. Crossing gates are fully in the fully lower position. A designated qualified employee is stationed at the crossing and has the ability to communicate with the trains, or at the crossing equipped with on flashing lights, passive warning devices with clearly seen with no traffic is approaching or stopped at the crossing, and the leading end of the movement over the crossing does not exceed 50 miles per hour. 5. Movement shall not be made without interlocking limits of the control points of the limits unless the following conditions are met. The signal governing movement is favorable, then restricting aspect. B. Each signal governing the movement in each of the interlocking limits of the control point limits shall be continuously observed by a member of that crew who is in the position to determine that the train's movement has occupied a circuit controlling that signal is evidence of the signal as assuming it is the most restrictive aspect. The movement does not exceed the train's length. Shoving the pushing movement is made in the direction of the circuited end of the designated departure track equipped with the shove light system. If and all the following conditions are met, the shove light system is demonstrated to be fail-safe. The shove light system is arranged with the display of the less favorable aspect of the circuited section of this track is occupied. Written procedure adopted and complied with provided with reliable means of determining the track occupancy prior to the commencing of the shoving or pushing movement. The track is designated and written in writing. The track is under the exclusive continuous control of the yard master other than qualified employee. The train crew member or other qualified employee directing the shoving and the pushing of the movements complies with the general movement of the requirements contained in paragraph B1 and B2 of this section. 4. All remote control shoving and the pushing movements comply with the requirements contained in the paragraph C1 of the section 8 of the shove light system is continuously eliminated when the circuit section is in the track and is unoccupied. 218.101 leaving rolling or on the track maintenance way of the equipment in the clear. Each of the railroad shall adopt and comply with an operating rule that complies with the requirements of the section with any of the person including but not limited to each of the railroad and railroad officer, supervisor, or employee violates any of the requirements of operating rule which complies with the requirements of this section. That person shall be considered that had be violated with the requirements of this section. B. Rolling on track of the maintenance of the way equipment shall not left without a following connection to the track unless the equipment is standing on the main track of the side tracking with the switch of the equipment is following of the line with the main track on which the equipment is standing. Equipment is standing on the siding of the main track, which the equipment of the following is aligned with the siding on which the equipment is standing. The equipment is standing on the yard of the switching lead track of the yard track switching. The equipment is the following line is the yard switching. The lead track on which the equipment is standing. The equipment is on an industry track beyond the clearance point of the switching lead of the industry. Each of the railroads shall implement the procedures for that enable the employees to identify the clearance points of the means of identifying locations which clearance with the points will not permit a person to safely ride on the side of the car. 218.103 hand-operated switches, including crossover switches. A1. Each of the railroads shall adopt and comply with the operating rules, such as which will comply with the requirements of this section, but with any of the person, including but not limited to each of the railroad officer, supervisor, or employee, violates any of the requirements of the operating rule, which complies with the requirements of this section. The person shall be considered to have violated the requirements of this section. 2. Each of the railroads shall specify the minimum requirements necessary for any adequate job briefing. B. The general employees operating with this verifying in the position of the hand-operated switch shall 1. Conduct job briefings before working has begun each of the time of the work plan of the chain, the completion of the work. Be qualified with the railroad operating rules relating to the operating of the switch. Be individually responsible for the position of the switch in use. 4. Visually determine if that the switches are properly aligned for the intended route that no equipment is following. The switch is visually determined at the point of the fits point properly in the target if so is equipped with corresponding with the switch position after the operating switches before making the movements in either direction of the switch. Ensure that the switch is secured with the unintentional movement of the switch points. Ensure that the switch is not operating while rolling on the track of the maintenance of the way equipment is following the switch or standing or moving over the switch. After the operating in the switch is to ensure that it is not in use. Each of the switch is locked up and hooked and latched if it is so is equipped. C. Rolling and on-track maintenance of the way of the equipment shall not follow the track on until all the hand-operated switches are connected on with the movement and are properly lined. In the case of the hand-operated switches, designed and permitted to be trailed through and until the intended route is seen to be clear. With the train has been granted to move the authority with the conflicting movement approaching the hand-operated switch. The track shall not be followed or the switch operated. When the rolling on the track maintenance of the way of the equipment has been entered on the track, the hand-operated switch of the track shall be not lined away from the track until the equipment has been past the clearance point of the track. Alright, 218.105 additional operation requirements of the hand-operated main track switches. Each railroad should adopt and comply with the operating rule which should comply with the requirements of this section, which any of the person included but not limited to each of the railroad officers, supervisors, or employee that violates any of the requirements of the operating rule on which it complies with these requirements of this section, that the person shall be considered to have violated the requirements of this section, be a designated switch in position, normal position, the hand-operated main track shall be designated by the railroad in writing, and the switch shall be lined and locked in that position when not in use, and except the train dispatcher directs otherwise with respect to the position of the hand-operated main track switch. Necessary protection is provided, but the hand-operated switch is left in charge of the crew member of another train or switch tender or a roadway worker in charge. See the additional job briefing requirements for the hand-operated main track switches before the train or the train crew leaves the location where the hand-operated main track switch was operated. All crews shall have the verbal communication to confirm that the position of the switch. In the case of the exclusive track occupancy authority established under the statute 214-321, the file time under the statute 214-323, and the train coordination under statute 214-325, when the railroad worker qualified to operate with the hand-operated main track switch is granted permission by the railroad worker in charge to occupy the otherwise in the use of the limits of the exclusive of the train occupancy, such employee receiving the permission to occupy the working limits shall report the position of any of the switches operated upon the expiration of the authority limits to the roadway worker in charge of the designated intermediate employee with the shall convey with the switch positions to the roadway worker in charge. D. Releasing authority limits. In non-signal territory, before an employee releases the limits of a main track authority, the hand-operated switch is used to clear the main track, and prior to departing the switch location, the following conditions are required. The employee releasing the limits after conducting the job briefing in accordance with the subpart shall report the train dispatcher that the hand-operated main track switch has been restored to its normal position locked unless the train dispatcher directs that the hand-operated main track switch shall be left lined and locked in the reverse position and necessary for the protection is provided. If the report of the switch position is correct, the train dispatcher shall repeat the reported switch position information of the employee releasing the limits and asking whether that is correct and 3, the employee releasing the limits shall then confirm to the train dispatcher that the information is correct. 218.107 additional operational requirements for the hand-operated switches. Each of the railroad should adopt and comply with the operating rules which comply with the requirements of these sections, with any of the person included but not limited to each of the railroad officer, supervisor, and employee violates any of the requirements of an operating rule which complies with the requirements of this section, and that the person shall be considered to be violated with the requirements of this section. Be a hand-operated crossover switch. Both of the hand-operated switches and crossover shall properly be lined before rolling on track of the maintenance way of the equipment begins with the crossover movement. The crossover movement should be completed before and either the hand operated with the crossover switch is restored to the normal position. Corresponding on the hand operated switch, hand operated crossover switches shall be left in correspondence position except when used to provide a blue signal protection under the statute 218.27 of this part. 2. Used in inaccessible track protection under statute 214.327 of this chapter. 3. Performing maintenance and testing of the inspection crossover of the switches in the traffic control system TCS territory. 4. One of the crew using the both track and connecting with the crossover during the continuous switching operations section when any of the persons included but not limited to each of the railroad officer, supervisor, and an employee violates any of the requirement of the operating rule which complies with the requirements of this section, the person shall be considered to have been violated with the requirements of this section. Each railroad shall specify minimum requirements as necessary for any of the adequate job briefings. 1. General. In the normal position of the fixed derails is the derailing position except for the provided within Part 218 Subpart B of this chapter of the railroad operating rules with the special instructions. 2. The fixed derail shall be kept in the derailing position whether or not any of the rolling on-track maintenance of the way equipment is on the tracks for the they protect except as provided in paragraph B1 of the section to when the change in the permit movement. 3. Movement must be not made over the fixed derail, the derailing position. Employees operating with the verifying the position of the fixed derail shall 1. Conduct the job briefing before the work has begun. Each at the time of the work of the plan is changed. At the completion of the work, be qualified as the railroad's operating rules relating to the operation of the derail. Be individually responsible for the position of the derail in use. 4. Determine that the target if is equipped with the corresponding with the derail position. Determine that the derail is secured. Placing in the throw lever in the latch stand is if so equipped. Placing the lock and the hook in the hasp, and if so equipped, testing in such latches, locks, and hooks ensure that when not in use, derails are locked, hooked, and latched in normal position if so equipped. And this is the appendix to Part 218, the Schedule of Civil Penalties, Blue Signal Protection. And you can look at these anytime. And there's several different appendixes, but that went over this statement of, that goes over the statutes for... I don't know. Subpart F, handling equipment and switches, fixed derailments.